Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show, Your Decision 2018. My special guest in part one of this two-part series is Phil Weiser, the Democratic nominee for Colorado Attorney General. Phil, great having you back on the show.
It's great to be back, Aaron. Thanks so much.
Hey, my pleasure. Okay, why do you want to be Attorney General, given how difficult that job is?
We are living in a very difficult time. I've been about public service my whole career, starting working with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Byron White at the Supreme Court, in the Justice Department in 2 administrations. I've never run for office before. But I've known if you want to serve, you might have to run for office. Now is a time when the rule of law, the rights of all Coloradans, it matters to have a state attorney general who fights for that. And so I looked at this race and decided that if I want to defend the Colorado I believe in and fight for the American dream that my family benefited from, I had to put myself out there, and I've done that, and it's been an incredible experience.
All right, you have an opponent. Last time you were on the show, you were in a primary.
I had several opponents last time. I'm down to only one.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a Libertarian candidate in the ballot, so I guess we have 2.
All right, well, that's, I was going to say, I'm not sure how much publicity you want to give your opponents, but talk about why you should win and why you should be Attorney General. And I want you to contrast that with George, who's been on the show, George Brockler, who's your Republican opponent.
We need an Attorney General who's a leader with broad-based legal experience across the issues that matter to Coloradans, from protecting our water rights, protecting air quality, public lands, standing up for civil rights and equal justice for all, and fair treatment for everybody. These issues matter, and the Attorney General has a lot of influence on what the state of Colorado does, even whether to sue our federal government. On many of these important issues, George Brockler is on the wrong side for Colorado. When it comes to protecting people based on sexual orientation, George Brockler won't do it. When it comes to preserving Roe versus Wade and a woman's right to choose, George Brockler doesn't believe in that. And it comes to standing up against Jeff Sessions and a federal government refusing to defend the Affordable Care Act's protection of everyone who has pre-existing conditions, George Brockler is silent. We need an Attorney General protecting the rights of all Coloradans. That's what I'll do with a wide range of legal experience and the ability to lead this institution on behalf of the people of Colorado.
All right, so one of the things that your opponent has, of course, he's been and still is the district attorney in Arapahoe County and I guess the 18th Judicial District. Right. And certainly he has a lot of courtroom experience. He's been involved in prosecuting criminals. I think a lot of Coloradans see the Attorney General's office as kind of the top cop of the state. And although that's not quite accurate, talk about how accurate that perspective is, and also how do you really match up with George in those areas?
You're right. George has been a criminal prosecutor for pretty much his whole career. That's less than 10% of the office. It's a pretty modest part. The office covers a whole range of issues. In fact, every single issue our state faces and that the people of Colorado face, from protecting voting rights and our democracy, to protecting our public lands, our air and our water, to standing up for consumers so they're not mistreated. We need someone to lead the office across those sets of issues. Because of his experience, George will talk a lot about, as if he's going to be a king DA. But I'll tell you, the district attorneys, they want nothing less than an attorney general who thinks that he or she oversees and manages all the DAs. The way you work with the DAs and the way you work with criminal justice is as a collaborator. I'm going to take that as Attorney General. I work with and for the DAs. I'll do your appeals for you. I'll work together on criminal justice reform to make our system work better. I'll have some resources I can help provide you so you can do your jobs better. But if you're talking as if your job is to keep everybody safe as the Attorney General, you're talking about the wrong job. Now, I recognize what you said. There's a misperception that people need to know the Attorney General is the lawyer for all the people of Colorado, all their rights on a range of issues, whether it's clean air, not being discriminated against, or not being defrauded by companies. So I have to get my message out that I want to be the lawyer for the people of Colorado, protecting their rights. We'll do that during this campaign, and that's how we'll win.
All right, let me ask you in terms of the incumbent, Cynthia Kaufman, what would you have done differently compared to what she's done during her tenure?
I'll try to keep this answer short. There's actually a fair bit here. Let me start with protecting civil rights. The ban on people entering our nation because of their religion is something that truly shocked me. Separating families at the border who really are entitled to due process of law if they're an asylum seeker and they're actually having their kids taken away. We have a constitution in our nation. If the federal government won't stand up and follow it, we need states to stand up and call for our constitutional rights to be enforced. Another issue coming up is the census, where overruling decades and decades of precedent. Overruling the career professionals, Steve Bannon pushed the Commerce Department to ask about immigration status, which would have the calculated effect of undercounting the census, which is going to hurt Colorado. On all the issues I've mentioned, our governor has said we need an attorney general to protect the people of Colorado, protect our rights. And our attorney general has been missing in action. I won't be missing in action. Whether it's protecting immigrants, protecting our democracy, protecting consumers, I will be a leader protecting the rights of all Coloradans.
All right, so most people look at, for example, the issue of the separation of kids from their parents at the border. I think almost everybody was horrified by that, regardless of party, for the most part. Not everyone, but most people. What could our Attorney General, what could she have done during that period?
She could have joined with other states whose attorneys general have said, we can't allow this. We're going to challenge this as violating the Constitution. Our governor said, we're not going to be any part of this effort. But our attorney general sat on the sidelines. She was not active to stand up for our Constitution. And that's a concern. I recognize there are partisan issues. If it's a president of your party, not everybody's willing to take on the federal government. David Skaggs, when he was the congressman, David and I are friends, he and I taught together, of course, on separation of powers, he sued President Clinton for violating the Constitution. That's the type of leadership we need, which is principle above party and making sure we protect the rights of all Coloradans.
One of the issues you referenced was public safety. And I think historically, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, but I think historically Colorado voters have tended to see Republican candidates as more on par with their views of public safety, Democratic candidates not as strong. Do you think that view, that description is accurate? And if so, how do you counter it?
I'm not sure it's accurate. Part of what makes this misleading is a lot of the Democratic strongholds are in major urban areas. So Denver, Boulder, they've got district attorneys who are Democrats. You really have to have a fair fight to say, like in Jeffco, do Democrats win or Republicans win? And it's gone back and forth in those places. What I think we are in a moment on public safety is we can start asking, are we putting people in jail for the right reasons? There is an awareness that we've gone from the early 70s to today, 300,000 people incarcerated to over 2 million nationwide. That's a huge leap. Is it really keeping us safer, or are we putting some people in jail like nonviolent drug users, which are about 15% of the jail population, that maybe we don't need to be putting in jail? Maybe we should have drug treatment or other diversion programs. What I found is people all across the state believe we've got to be smarter about criminal justice, and that's what I'll fight to do as Attorney General.
All right, one of the things I want to talk about is our Department of Corrections. I think a lot of Coloradans don't realize how many people we have incarcerated or in the system, as it were, and especially how much it costs us. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Phil Weiser in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harper Show and keep hope alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with a Democratic nominee for Attorney General, Phil Weiser. So, Phil, we were talking about the whole issue of incarceration, and I mentioned at the end of the last segment, I think most Coloradans don't realize we spend almost $1 billion a year with incarcerating people in terms of prisons, jails, people in the system on parole, probation, and all that. An extraordinary amount of money. We have about 30,000 people in that system, approximately 20,000 actually physically incarcerated at any one time. What can we do to address those issues, the issues related to crime and the number of people we have incarcerated, but also to address the extraordinary amount of money we spend on this?
Aaron, I'm glad you're talking about this. This is a crucial issue, and the Attorney General has an ability to lead. We have a group of district attorneys. They meet in a Colorado District Attorneys Council. The Attorney General is invited to be there. The Attorney General is the appellate lawyer for this group. The Attorney General needs to be a leader on criminal justice improvement. When I've talked to DAs, they will be the first to say, this system is not working. I've talked to sheriffs who say, Alamosa County, for example, 92% of the people in the jail, which is overcrowded, are opioid users. And he says, I can't help them here. We've got to do better. One critical piece of this is drug treatment. If we invest in drug treatment as a way to help people get well, as opposed to putting people in jail, it's going to be more humane, it's going to be more effective. Now, we're going to raise money for drug treatment. I've got an idea about taking on a lawsuit against the pharmaceutical companies. We can talk about that in a little bit. But we need to create these resources. So we have the option of drug treatment. That's one important step we need to make, which is how do we do better? Another is when we look at the charging that happens. So for example, someone's about to be charged, we might ask the question, is there a diversion program before we go ahead and charge them? Give them an opportunity so that they can do, for example, restorative justice. Beth McCann's working on that in Denver. And for first-time offenders, that can be a very promising way to give people a chance to make amends. Because there is a whole vicious cycle that happens. Once we charge someone, once we convict them, once we put them in jail and prison and give them a record, they're far more likely to end up back in that system. So if we're more thoughtful and innovative on the front end, asking about alternatives to incarceration, like drug treatment, like the diversion programs I mentioned, we can do a lot better. And there's another key piece of this, and then I'll stop, which is bail. We have to recognize what our bail system is doing right now. If you have a lot of money, even if you're a threat to society or a flight risk, chances are you're going to get to pay cash bail. Easy for me to say. If you don't have any money, well, you're stuck in jail for months on end. And you may end up saying at the end, you know what, I'll just take a plea for the time I've already served, even if you didn't do it. We've got to fix our bail system like they've done in New Jersey and other states, so that's not about how much money you have, but about what's fair and right.
I think California recently passed essentially a no bail piece of legislation.
That's right. California followed New Jersey's model. This is under Chris Christie, where they said this cash bail system doesn't make sense because we need instead individualized determinations based on, are you a threat to public safety? And are you a flight risk? And if you aren't, you're out. And if you are, no matter how much money you have, we're going to keep you in.
All right, you mentioned restorative justice. Longmont, the city of Longmont, has had a very successful restorative justice program. But describe your concept of restorative justice. I think most Coloradans are not familiar with the concept.
Let me give you a stylized example, as lawyers like to say. If you had two neighbors who get in a dispute and it ends up with an assault, you could have the criminal justice system actually imprison one of the neighbors for a crime, assault. What happens then? The person who's in prison may lose their job, may be apart from their family, and you go back to that neighborhood, and there's a lot of hostility between the neighbors. Restorative justice is the following. What might we do for someone to take responsibility and make amends? And often the victims of crimes, they are the biggest proponents of restorative justice because they want an acknowledgement that they've been wronged. They don't necessarily always want the other person's life ruined or going to jail. So that would mean, how about a fine? How about doing some service? How about giving an authentic apology? And then how about talking about violence prevention or anger management? Those are all restorative justice techniques that work to heal the breach in a way that's not about putting someone in jail or prison. So it's often much more effective. The person who is the offender often feels much worse, takes accountability, and the person who's the victim can feel much better.
When we talk about the cost of not doing that process and sending someone, for example, to prison, our state can easily spend, in some cases, $40,000, almost $40,000 a year incarcerating a person. And of course, it depends on which prison you're in and what level system, et cetera. But if you look at the numbers that are incarcerated at any one time, and picking roughly the 20,000 figure. Do you have any sense of how many people we could take out of prison and work with effectively, just deploying the same resources?
It's a great question. And I've not done that exact analysis to know how big an impact it could have, but it is substantial. We now have private prisons operating in Colorado, which I find hugely troubling because they have a profit incentive to keep putting people away. I'd like to see us move away from private prisons the way President Obama wanted to do, move towards these alternatives. And we have to acknowledge one more thing, Aaron. This impact of incarceration, it's felt disproportionately on communities of color. And that's part of what makes this situation, to me, so untenable, that we are spending all these social resources, harming all these lives, and it's happening disproportionately based on people's appearance. And that's something that we have to be concerned about, and it's part of what creates a sense of urgency that we need to do better. We've got to build in these reform techniques. We in Colorado should be leading the nation in this issue, and I'll fight to do that as Attorney General.
Well, you mentioned private prisons. What are some of the other problems or challenges with private prisons that really should make them to taxpayers and citizens unattractive?
So one concern is they don't have the same rules and constitutional obligations that public prisons do. Public prisons have certain rules about how prisoners are treated, and private prisons are often cutting corners in ways that are very uncomfortable, and they don't necessarily have the same treatment of workers that are also as careful. So there's a lot of risk that we're taking in having private prisons. We should be nervous about those risks, and we should work to reduce them.
In terms of the other aspects, the financial aspects of private prisons, one of the challenges the state faces is that when we enter into a contract with some of the private prison providers, we actually are guaranteeing a certain number of inmates. That, to me, seems absolutely insane.
Yeah, this is part of just the economic incentive. We just need to recognize what is happening. We have a commitment to give prisoners to a private prison who's making money, and that private prison has the incentive to get their contract renewed and to keep up this cycle of putting more and more people in jail and prison. That's not what the goal should be. The goal is we keep people in prison when they're a threat to public safety. And if they're not, we should be looking at what alternatives make more sense.
Of course, the prison population in this state, too, hasn't it been growing?
It continues to grow.
And don't many, not only prisons find themselves at maximum capacity, but certainly a lot of the county jails do as well.
They're over capacity. I mentioned the opioid epidemic. It's worth putting a finer point on this. We didn't have many women in the Alamosa County Jail a decade ago. They're now a third of the population. And the overcrowding means that a room that used to have 2 people has 7. I went down with Robert Jackson for a tour. He says we need help from our Attorney General to deal with this incarceration issue because we just have too many people in jail. Mass incarceration, Robert Jackson says, is real, and he has a clear explanation, the opioid epidemic. I mentioned earlier, one way we'll take this on is to go after those pharmaceutical companies who lie to people about these opioids, because some of the people end up in jail. There's a story behind it. And one theme I've heard again and again, it starts with someone maybe had an injury, starts taking pills. They get 3 months supply, and they find themselves dependent. They find more pills. Then they go to heroin because it's cheaper and more accessible.
Or their prescription has run out.
Or their prescriptions run out. And they often will end up in jail. And what Robert Jackson says, this is not a cycle we can continue to have, because then they go out of jail, they get back on, they come back. We've got to invest in drug treatment. When we win this case against pharmaceutical companies, and by the way, my opponent, for some reason, doesn't want to take this case on, even though a whole bunch of other states are doing it, a number of 15 and counting localities in Colorado signed up. We're going to win this case, we will get money, and then comes the important problem solving, which is how do we build sustainable drug treatment across our state.
All right, we're going to take our last break for this program, and we'll be back with Phil Weiser in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howe Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. Remember, this is part one of our special two-part series with Phil Weiser. So let's talk about a couple issues in relation to incarceration. Are there other states doing a better job than Colorado? And what models are out there that you find attractive that we need to take a look at?
One painful fact for me, we're not doing as good a job in some respects as we were a decade ago. A decade ago in the San Luis Valley, we had these programs, outdoor adventure programs for juveniles as an alternative to incarceration. Those programs don't exist anymore, and part of the problem is what you put your finger on, Aaron. The economics aren't set up to sustain those programs. We cut back on the jail population, we put them in these alternative programs, but then we don't fund the alternative programs. The key thing that we used to do better at, and that other states are doing better at now, is look at these funding streams and create funding for alternatives. Because when we cut back on the jail population, we can't simply say, oh, we saved money. No, we've got to invest in these alternatives. That gets back to this opioid epidemic. When we get the money from suing pharmaceutical companies, we can't just give the money out to localities and say, good, spend the money. No, we've got to create sustainable drug treatment so that we take people away from the jail, which is not helping them, give people drug treatment, help them rebuild their lives. That's the sort of approach that other states have been using, and we need to use it here.
All right, I want to jump to opioids and marijuana in a minute. But first, I'd be interested in kind of who is having the most success reducing rates of recidivism. The idea that so many people who do, once they're in the system, kind of get stuck. They may serve their time, and such a high percentage come back, are, they're again prosecuted again, they're back in prison, back in jail, whatever. How do we lower that rate?
I appreciate you asking about this, and there are some examples here in Colorado that people should know about. And what is important is we know what lowers the rate at which people are rearrested and reincarcerated. We need to start doing more of it. It is smart, humane, and it's cost effective. Here's one example. Cross Purpose is a program here in Denver. When people leave, like Kenny, they sometimes leave with a little bit of training while they were incarcerated. So in Kenny's case, he learned how to train dogs while he was in prison. He came out, Cross Purpose helped him find a job, actually with a friend of mine, working the night shift. And they're helping him build his own dog training business during the day. He is an example of someone who has a new lease on life. He took responsibility for what he did was wrong. He was actually sentenced under one of these recidivism statutes, so he got a huge long sentence. And he said, I'm going to rebuild my life, and these dogs are saving my life. That's the sort of work that Cross Purpose is doing. We need to scale up these programs. It's the right way to approach what has been a big challenge for our state, because we continue to have, as you say, continued growth in the prison population. It's not sustainable, it's not fair, and it's not humane. We can do better. We've just got to invest in these programs that work.
All right, and going back to opioids, I mean, I don't think you hear as much about opioid addiction or challenges here in Colorado as you do, for example, in Ohio or West Virginia. Number one, is that true? And if so, number two, why is that?
Depends where you are in Colorado, Aaron. I've been to all 64 counties. And in some of the counties, like when I was in Crowley County, or when I was in Trinidad, or I'm in Pueblo, or I'm in Alamosa, I hear a lot about opioids. It is destroying lives, families, and communities. And you go to the Alamosa County Jail, it's evident. part of what is happening, and this is a vicious cycle we've got to break through, if communities aren't ones where there's a lot of opportunity and people are more vulnerable, they're more vulnerable to addiction. And they then find themselves in a spiral where they're being taken advantage of, where they may even have trouble keeping a job. We need to find a way to break through that and to turn it around. I believe in areas like the San Luis Valley, we can create great sources of drug treatment. Southeast Colorado, and we got to just cut through whatever bureaucratic red tape is slowing it down. We've got to be innovative about creating this drug treatment, and that'll actually become a source of hope and recovery and even jobs. That's where I want to put our investments, not in prisons. Crowley County, for example, has 2 prisons. It's the largest employer. I'd rather see us build more drug treatment centers there.
All right, and you mentioned Southwest and Southeast Colorado as examples. What about marijuana? I mean, obviously, Colorado has been a leader in legalizing marijuana. Talk about the challenges that we face there and also the federal government's role.
So there are a few different pieces to this puzzle. First, let's start with us being a pioneer. We looked at this issue and said, are we putting people in jail for using marijuana? Does that make sense? We said, let's not do that. So we took a step away from the overcrowding problem we've been talking about. Second, we can allow it to be a legal transaction and tax it. So in Pueblo, for example, there are college scholarships based on taxing marijuana. In Eagle County, there's mental health treatment because we're taxing marijuana. There are issues for kids getting access. That's something we got to be vigilant about, making sure that kids are not thinking, oh, this is an edible, looks like, you know, a brownie, I'll just have it. We've got to make sure things are labeled and we're not having kids accidentally ingest it. We also worry a little about a black market arising because sometimes people could plant marijuana here, not for sale in Colorado, but say, oh, I'll just ship it to another state. That's illegal. We need to enforce our laws on that. The federal government looms large because we have an Attorney General right now, Jeff Sessions, who doesn't seem to understand everything we've been talking about criminal justice reform. His view is more people in jail and prison for longer, including for marijuana offenses.
So I recently did a show with Attorney General Sessions, and he has a passion against marijuana that I have not seen in most people before. Address that challenge, because I don't see any way you or anyone else are going to be able to change his mind.
There are a few important points here. The first point is, as a legal matter, the 10th Amendment protects the states. We are not going to allow our state to be commandeered by the federal government, by the U.S. Department of Justice, to do its bidding. We are going to protect our sovereignty, and that is a decision we've made about marijuana, keeping it legal. So that's the first point. Second, politically, we need to work around him and in the Congress to enable us to have banking of marijuana, because right now it's a cash economy, and that is literally like people holding lots of cash. It's not healthy. So we've got to fix the restrictions on banking. There's also a problem getting tax deductions for your expenses. We've got to fix that too. He's an impediment, but he's on the wrong side of history. We will overcome.
Finally, kids and marijuana. What kind of leadership, and I know we only have 30 seconds left, what kind of leadership can the Attorney General do in terms of educating kids and keeping our youth away from marijuana, especially given the recent research about brain development and the impact of marijuana potentially on the brains of our youngest people?
So very quickly, part of the money from this is to help do what you just said, to explain to kids this is a dangerous product, don't use it, to explain to parents. And we have a regulatory framework. The Attorney General is the lawyer for the Department of Revenue, which is the one that manages this framework. We make sure to have the right regulations so that providers are being responsible, and those that aren't, we will hold them accountable. This is an important point, and I'll work hard on this as Attorney General.
All right, fair enough, Phil.
Great to be with you, Aaron. Thank you.
My pleasure. That was Phil Weiser, the Democratic nominee for Attorney General here in Colorado. Remember to watch Part 2. This is the end of Part 1. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.